Hello, I am Super Orange Cat, and here I am today ranking the 10 episodes of season 23 of South Park from the worst episode to the best. Overall, this was a pretty solid season of the show, probably one of the better ones in this decade. So, without further ado, let's start from the worst episode of the season. So, the 10th best episode of the season was season finale. Now, this episode, if you remember, this is the one that was the quote unquote supposed to be the end of the Tegrity Farms plotline, with people finding out that Randy was the one who did destroy everyone's homegrown gardens. So, people were starting to gang up on him. And also, it had kind of the subtext of this going on during the early stages of the Donald Trump impeachment process. So that kind of served as the background for this in a way. So you had the one time all season where Mr. Garrison, as the president, reappeared. And when Randy was calling him for help, he said, it's like, oh, do you have any good lawyers? And he's like, do I need a good lawyers? No, I don't. I know Rudy Giuliani, which honestly was probably the only really good joke in this episode. But, and again, it was one of those things like, at the same time, everything was kind of obvious and on the nose about this episode. Like a lot of the meta commentary about the part of the fan base who did not like the Tegrity Farms plotline, it got to the point where it's just kind of, okay, we get it, we get it, we get it, but the show kept droning on and on about it. And he also had the subplot of the Whites, their son Jason, who's been a background character virtually the entire show, being run over by a car, and them being the most one note joke characters on the show, where it's like, oh, no one cares when this happens to the whites. And it's like, you could talk about the political commentary behind that and social commentary, but my issue with it is that it is the only joke ever spoken when they're on the screen. And it just gets so annoying and boring after hearing it 20 times in one episode. And then you had the most obvious plot twist where, they adopted this Mexican kid who's angry. I bet he's gonna be the Mexican Joker. And what do you know? End of the episode, he ends up being the Mexican Joker, which is a plot line the show drops because it was, in a weird way, this episode killed any enjoyment of that plot line, which is pretty impressive. And this is probably the one episode of the 10 this season I would actually argue was actually a bad episode, which comes to speak to say how good the actual quality of the season is. That this an episode I just will just avoid watching again, and not really like if I'm ranking like the worst episodes of all time in the show, this would not be on it. But again, very disappointing episode. And now the ninth best episode of the season was Mexican Joker, the season premiere. South Park has had a very recent trend, especially in recent years, of having very weak starts to the season. And this trend continued on to this season with Mexican Joker. And like I said, my theory for why the first episode each season always ends up being weak is the fact that they feel like they have to cram in 9 months of current events into a 30-minute episode instead of taking things week by week, like how they can for any other episode, just covering like one or two topics that happened that week. So basically, the main focus of this episode was over the concept of the ICE detention centers, and there were a couple good gags with it, like the whole concept of them not being sure if this is the flashback to what caused the Mexican Joker to be the Mexican Joker. The puppet show where it's like the people in charge of the ICE detention center to like trying to teach the kids to not become the Mexican Joker. I thought that was a pretty good gag too, and the concept of making this a moral issue by converting all the kids in the detention center to Judaism so it looked like a concentration camp. I kind of like those bits. But overall, this was not really a big enough bang to the season. And honestly, if I was getting worried after this episode first aired that this was going to be another weak season. Fortunately, the rest of the season kind of disproved that. But again, although this episode definitely had its moments, it was very lackluster relative to the rest of the season. Now, the eighth best episode of the season was Bored Girls, in my opinion at least. And this episode does have a nice dual plot line with the first part being about the concept of transgender athletes, male to female transgender athletes competing in female sports, and due to having testosterone, having some type of innate advantage, and also balancing that with PC Principal and strong women who are always very PC. Them kind of having to confront that the world is not necessarily as cut and dry. And although when PC Principal first appeared on the show, I thought, okay, this is a dumb one note character. He's going to be gone by the end of the season. More as time gone on, I've kind of come to like him as a character, which is something I would have never thought. And again, I really liked his development in this episode. And the B plot, honestly, that was kind of weak and kind of obvious, where you had the concept of Cartman being angry that like the girls actually read the rules of the board game, so they're like innately better at it. Which so trying to do like a counterbalance of like, well, men are better at women than sports, but girls read the rules for board games better. Which, although I definitely get the sentiment of, and I can appreciate that, I still feel like it fell relatively flat in a way. But again, this was actually overall a pretty all right episode. I don't have any true dark marks against it. So like, and that still makes it the best episode of the season. So there's seven that are even better than this, in my opinion. So seventh best episode was the episode Integrity Farms Halloween Special. Had to make sure I pronounced that right. And the basic plot of this is Randy is back at Tegrity Farms, of course, and he was trying to produce this specific strain for this holiday party he and Tally are working on called the Tegrity Farms Halloween Special. In this episode, the biggest mark against it, in my opinion, was how kind of very there it was. Like, there was not that much about this episode that made it stand out outside of it being part of the Tegrity Farms overall plot line. But I did absolutely love the ending where you had Randy and Towley having this marijuana induced hallucination that Winnie the Pooh, stay tuned on that later, and all the different cows were attacking them and have the cops come over and see them just swatting at themselves and stuff. I thought was pretty funny. And also coupled with the continuous gag with this plot line and the Butters and the Mummy plot line of these like cheesy like 1980s B movie special effects just randomly thrown in at different points too. I thought was a pretty neat gag. But again, this episode I felt like more could have been done on the comedy front. Necessarily wasn't. And also the fact that I kind of thought that the Butters and Mummy plot line was kind of redundant and really, it's just almost like every other Butters plotline ever. Like almost every Butters plotline in the show is Butters does something he thinks is normal, or at least we can perceive as normal, but everyone interprets him as being in the wrong. Like in this episode, it's everyone thinks Butters is wrong for refusing the mummy's gift or not appreciating the mummy's love for him. Over time, kind of got a little grating. But again, not the first episode. Definitely better, definitely some worse in the season. Now, the sixth best episode, in my opinion, this season was the Scott Mackelson episode, Basic Cable. What I really liked about this episode, especially, was the gag about how slow and inefficient cable installers are, how, like, the inevitable downfall of cable, and also just kind of the whole meta commentary of South Park being a show that's on cable, one of the most popular shows on cable right now, coupled with the fact that it had this lucrative streaming deal with Hulu where the new episodes would air the next day. But I believe starting next year it's gonna be at least I'm not sure if it's gonna premiere or at the very least it's gonna have like next day shown on HBO Max, since HBO Max is really in the mood of just buying out properties right now, which I think is pretty interesting. But again, back to this episode. And I kind of like the whole plot line of all the boys going after the new girl in class. Admittedly, it's a bit of a trope in TV of new girl in class and all the boys immediately fall in love with her. But especially love the hypocrisy of Cartman, who told him from his experience with Heidi in seasons 20 and 21 that, dude, it's not worth it. There are some great moments, but it's ultimately not worth it. And then him just to completely abandon Scott for this new girl, too. I thought was pretty funny. And it definitely reminded me of the episode Bebe Destroys Society from like back to season 7, which I thought was a good commentary on this too, this whole concept too. And again, some pretty good things about this episode. Only downfall about it might be the fact that it was again a little light in overall laughs, especially if the whole I'm Scott Michelson and I have diabetes joke kind of wears down on you over time. Then this might not necessarily be the episode for you. But again, I thought this was a pretty enjoyable experience. Now we're halfway there, and now into the episodes I really loved about this season. Let's start with the best episode of the season, Christmas Snow. Special of the season. And the best I'm just going to go into some of the gags I really loved about this episode. The whole concept of everyone wanting to get drunk for the holidays because that's the only way they can stand their families. The fact that everyone took this weird, sick pride on driving drunk and crashing into each other, and then later taking pride on being high on marijuana and then being high on cocaine and driving into each other too. And also the whole gag of Cartman being like, "Wow, Butters, your mom is so full of the Christmas spirit. She's driving an ATV completely topless." And the show her just driving down the street too. I also love the whole concept of like Santa being this like teetotaling Puritan, like, don't drunk drive during the holidays. That's the time with the most drunk driving deaths, and everyone being very frustrated at it too. And I also loved, especially the hallmark of this episode was the pseudo fake commercial for the marijuana free Christmas snow, which was pure cocaine in which you had these like different parts, especially if like Randy like standing by the fence post with his very high face, with his like gritting his teeth and like licking it like he was high on coke. I thought it was a pretty good touch, pretty hilarious too. And again, I thought it was just pretty solid episode top down. Only reason why it's not even higher on this list is because simply because there were just some episodes that were just downright even more funny this year. And let's go into it. The fourth best episode this season was the episode called Turd Burglars. Now, the basic premise of this episode is that Kyle's mom is sick. She needs to have what is called a fecal transplant, which in the show is taking someone's healthy fecal matter, which has all the E. coli that helps break down food in the body, and to have it inserted in her using water. And it was just this hilarious gag too. A lot of these tiny meta gags. Like first off, this had probably one of the better intro sequences. Now throughout the season, there's been these different intros, different co- plot lines to episodes. Like you have the episode the Integrity Farm intro. You had this one, the one for the ladies intro, which I thought was pretty funny. You also had like the Scott Malcolmson show too. And overall, I just thought this was a pretty good episode, especially the very notable moments being towards the beginning when Ike was just embarrassed by his mom bragging about this transplant to her friends. The we like open up the bag of chips, poured them out, and put the bag over his head. I thought it was a pretty nice, pretty cute joke to add to the show. And also the whole concept of when the women were like feeling healthy, they would wear athletic clothes, which, like I mentioned in that review, was a lot like the commercials you'll see on like on daytime television for like old people drugs, where it's like take this drug and you'll be healthy. Watch these senior citizens doing active activities like ballroom dancing or playing golf, which seems very esoteric, but if you've watched daytime TV, those commercials are absolutely everywhere. And again, I thought that was a funny gag too, and especially the whole concept at the end of all the women getting sick. And can't forget the whole concept of Tom Brady having the spice melange, the Dune reference, and also the concept of how's Tom Brady been able to stay this healthy into his 40s as a NFL quarterback. Although that's not necessarily as fitting now, considering he's actually had kind of a bad season. But again, now on to the third best episode of the season entitled Let Them Eat You. This is an episode making fun of the whole plant-based food options that have become more widely available, most notably the Impossible Whopper at Burger King, which was actually pretty popular when it was in Burger King stores. And it was one thing I like noting was how Randy Marsh and Tally were like, we have all this excess weed that we can't sell to China anymore, which more stay tuned on the whole China thing in a minute anymore. So how are we going to get rid of all this marijuana? And I think Tally's like, we can use it as compost. So they were like going to the compost place. Randy takes a bite of an Impossible Whopper and realizes I can just turn my marijuana into burgers, which is what happens. It becomes a smash success, especially the tagline, tastes like shit, you won't care, being pretty hilarious in my opinion, because it's like this self-fulfilling cycle of you eat the burger because you want to know what a marijuana burger is, you get high off of it, you get the munchies, and it doesn't really matter if the burger tastes bad. You're gonna want more because you have the munchies. It's hilarious, like complete circle, which led to people buying all these marijuana burgers and making Randy a lot of money, and also leading to probably, in my opinion, the absolute best sequence of events in this season. The gag towards the end of the episode where the disgruntled farmer gave Randy and Callie like 300 cows, in order to get rid of the cows, they decided to get high on marijuana, get all these guns, and start killing all the cows while Pass the Dutchie by Musical Youth was playing in the background, which, in this weird way, was this most serene, most unbelievably hysterical sequence of events I've seen in South Park in a long time. And also, like I said, this was the one moment all season I think I absolutely hysterically nonstop laughed. And it's pretty rare to make me laugh like in that way at all. So that's what helps improve this episode right off the board. And also the whole no country for old men. It's one of those movies that the main quote antagonist was about where it's like, I'm a cool man. I thought that was a pretty good joke too. With Cartman honestly not caring about the plant-based substitute food because they all come through the same factory-based process that most normal food is made, kind of pointing out the hypocrisy of this organic or plant-based food movement, which that was a pretty good commentary too. And now on to the top two episodes of the season. In my opinion, the second best episode of the season was the episode Shots. This episode was mostly about the whole anti-vaxxer movement where it's like, oh, if you give your kids vaccines, they'll get mercury poisoning, they'll become autistic, they'll become goo-eating monsters or something, you know. And it's just the ultimate like how Cartman was like, and also just like coming from the gag of not like, oh, these people want to destroy the earth, but more from like, oh, Cartman's just scared to get a shot. That's why he's in this movement. Not from him being a complete idiot like how it usually is. It's from the whole childlike fear of shots that he has too. And also absolutely the whole comparison of Cartman and other kids not wanting to get shots, comparing them to pigs, to cattle, and rodeos too. And just like the country music would start playing every time Cartman started squealing, running around, and literally covering himself in Crisco, which is so hilarious every single time. And also combine that with the whole at the end where they actually get Mesquite Murph. He routed up some of his guys, routed up some doctors, rounded them up, and got him to do this rodeo where they took every kid in Park County that wasn't vaccinated and got him vaccinated rodeo style. And how they were able to blend these elements, I thought was pretty well done, especially with the random toy chest still in the corner of the ring, too. It's like, now little Davy can get a nice toy out of the toy chest. This rodeo is brought to you by Chevrolet. I really like that gag too. And also kind of how they really developed Leanne Cartman as a mom for literally like the first time in the show. From this whole, I know not vaccinating my kid is bad, but at the same time, I want my kid to love me. And it really comes to show like this whole, and also comparing her with the whole Randy Marsh plot line of the family hating him at Tegrity Farms. And of course, this episode was the episode where he bragged about making $300,000 from China and him blowing that money on literally bragging about it, most notably the commercial, which in terms of jokes probably was the highlight of the episode, especially the random part where he started speaking in patois too. This is a very Randy Marsh thing to do. An overall very solid episode. An episode I'll definitely be revisiting in future years. However, there was still one episode I think surpassed this one. And if you followed me throughout the season, I have repeatedly said that this was the best episode, so this should not come as any surprise. It is the second episode of the season entitled Banned in China. Now, South Park. South Park in recent years has actually struggled usually in combining their commentary with their jokes, with their comedy. Case in point being that whole debacle that was season 20 back in 2016, the troll season. But this episode absolutely knocked it out of the park on many fronts. Like, first off, you had the whole gag of Randy being like, thinking he's the original person to think of an American business. Oh, I could sell my product to the growing market in China, which every corporation has been doing for decades at this point. And he also had the whole gag of this was around the time Disney Plus was becoming a bigger concept. Disney was buying out all these properties. Disney, I think, has already bought out Fox. And you had the gag of Mickey Mouse being Mickey Mouse, the perpetually angry Mickey Mouse, complaining about who's the person who blabbed about China sucking. And to have it be, oh, it's this Randy Marsh, and have him like, what's he from? And he's like, and then like, oh, he's from South Park. Do I own that? No, not yet, sir. I just love the commentary on that joke too, and also just this whole meta commentary with the Crimson Dawn plotline, Stan's band, of them doing this Bohemian Rhapsody style movie, but them having to cut out all these different parts because China didn't approve of it, and yet ultimately this ending where it's like you have to either be completely saccharine, completely sell it to China, or to keep your own dignity. With Stan and his friends deciding to just keep their own dignity at the end, come high or hell water, with Randy doing the opposite of selling out to China, which led to Tally being angry, which definitely led to his family being angry, which really built well into the next episode, which was shot, like I said, was a great episode too, and just top down amazing episode. This one I would probably end up ranking among the top 10 episodes of the entire series, and this really saved the show from the previous episode, which was Mexican Joker, which I thought was a weak episode, but this episode absolutely knocked it out of the park, and I thought really made. And also, if you look at like overall reception, this episode probably was the episode that brought South Park back into being this mainstream cultural force again. Because you had South Park kind of waning away over time, but this episode put them back in the forefront. I thought it was just this really well done episode, and I absolutely loved it. And again, I'll be revisiting this episode many times in the future. What do you guys think? What's your favorite episodes? What's your least favorite episodes of the season? Leave your comments down below. I love reading them. If you like this, if you want more South Park content, please like, please subscribe, please hit the notification button. I am Super Orange Cat, and that is all.